Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this week's episode of the Thought Fuel podcast. We have a very special episode today. We are talking with children's author K.Marcus, she is somebody that I've known for quite some time and was also part of my journey. So I'm very excited for her to be joining us. So without any further ado, K.Marcus, or Kimberly as I know you, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm so excited and I'm so happy for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's still a work in progress, and our listeners know that this is still under construction. So if something doesn't go right, it's just part of the show. So, Kimberly, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've kind of worn many hats in my life. I started out as a professional photographer. I moved into becoming a public school elementary teacher. I've been a volunteer, activist, organizer, and now I'm a children's book writer.
Excellent. And I know that you have this very interesting journey. How has, your own life experiences influenced your own writing?
That's a good question. So I think that really from the beginning, I was always a reader from when I was a child. I was always reading. I would read while I was walking and bang into the walls because I was holding my book and reading. I would fall asleep with my book as a pillow. So I felt really connected to the authors and to the characters that I was reading about. And I wanted to be able to have a connection like that to my potential readers and be able to give them, a sense that maybe they were being seen or they could feel they found a world that they could be a part of or safe in or enjoy. So, and then my whole, your whole life leads you up to the certain point that you're in, right? So everything that I've done has led me to the point of where I can, have an idea that and bring it to completion. That was not always something I could do, but as I've grown and changed and evolved, it's something that I've really worked on and learned how to do. And I think it's something that, I really believe people are not fixed and can learn throughout their whole lives and change and grow. And I definitely have done that in my life.
Yeah, and that's a great answer. And you touched upon a couple of things that are really interesting to talk about. And the first thing you said was, I want to give my readers. And, through the process of creating any type of art or any project, sometimes we focus so much on the inward process, right? What's in it for me? But in the end, when you're creating something that's going to add value, you really need to focus on what it's going to give to somebody else. And just for the background, so the audience knows, I met Kimberly through the TEDx experience. Kimberly was the organizer, curator for TEDx Terrytown. And, I get this question all the time, like, how did you get involved in TEDx? How did you become an organizer? How did you become a speaker? And the answer is Kimberly Marcus. Just so everybody knows, I, like many people, had this idea, I want to become a TEDx speaker. And I thought, okay, I'm going to apply to like 2, 3 of them. I'm going to get selected. I'm going to do a talk, and then I'm going to do a talk. I thought it was pretty simple. But after applying to 3 and not getting an answer, the 3 became 6, 6 became 9, 9 became 18, 18 became 28, and you're not even getting a response. And you're just wondering, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I not as interesting or accomplished as I thought I was? So let me figure this out. And I became very, very curious about it. So I decided, you know what? Instead of reaching out to all these TEDx organizers and trying to become a TEDx speaker, which I'm sure they're inundated with requests from all over the world, maybe I'll just reach out to them and see if I could add any value to them. And I started getting responses right away. And in fact, Kimberly was the first person that I think I reached out to. And I said, hey, I have a skill set. I would love to volunteer for your upcoming event. I would love to talk to you. And I was based at the time in Astoria, and the event is called TEDx Tarrytown, so it's based in upstate New York. Living in Astoria, Queens, no car, it's quite a distance, but I made it work. I became a volunteer, and I helped Kimberly organize a very successful event. And from that moment onwards, she recommended me to someone else to help them out on their TEDx event. And then the following year, I organized my own TEDx event. COVID hit, and I had a long time to actually process. All right, okay, well, now I have all this experience in TEDx organization. I feel like I know what I want to give to the audience. And I had my successful TED Talk, and is the reason why a lot of you are listening in today. So Kimberly, if I haven't said thank you enough, thank you.
Well, I am forever grateful to you because you do have an amazing skill set and you saved me. So thank you. But I think what you're saying is really, really important. And is that, how are we going to best serve that we want to, tap into, right? And and I think that just like my general mindset from always was really giving and volunteering and really doing for others. So when I start something, I don't automatically think like, oh, how am I going to, make the most money? Maybe I should, I don't know. But it's really like, what can I give back? What can I do to help other people? And I think that, I've been a champion for the we call it Kidlit, the children's literature Kidlit community, for quite a while now, and I'm just so amazed by the love I'm getting from the people in the community. And I promote other people's books too, because other people's books are amazing. And I was at the bookstore the other day, and she the owner had her Valentine's display up, and I was like, you need to add this Valentine's picture book that I just read. It's great. So, you can't just think about yourself. You have to think about the other people that you need to serve, Um, and I think for some people that can be a hard mindset. And especially in the TEDx world, that's what it's all about, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it totally aligned with my personal beliefs of, trying to make the world a better place. So, it's just a wonderful, organization that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, not a lot of people know the amount of work that goes into it. And basically, the fact that it's a startup. So you
Yeah.
are not only organizing everything, you are recruiting volunteers, you're coordinating with venues, you're coaching speakers, you're trying to raise funds and all these different things. And it's a volunteer role. Like I
Yeah.
always thought like, oh, okay, that's the TED organization. They have their employees, they're throwing these events. It's not. It's a volunteer gig. And
Yeah.
in the end, you know what? I feel like I've gained so much from that experience. It
Me too.
is, yeah, I've organized 3 events. I've gained so much from that experience. I felt exhausted. And
Mm.
if I don't organize another event for the rest of my life, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
But because it takes out of you for sure. But
Yes.
I've met so many fascinating people and including yourself. And I'm very grateful for the experience. The other piece of that is you also encounter people that are super established in their fields and areas, and they have a fixed idea of what
Hmm.
they want to share with the world. And maybe they're getting pressure from their publicists, their agents, or their companies, but they're often like trying to do something where they're more comfortable in something that they've done many times before, and coaching people like that from having this fixed idea of what they want to share with the world to, listen, this is your opportunity to do something completely different and be
Hmm.
exposed to a different audience. Why put yourself in the position where they're going to search you and find the same talk 10 times over, right?
Hmm.
Why not share something unique? Why not carve out and be creative? And I felt that was the biggest piece that excited me the most about being the curator and coaching speakers to stretch their imagination and be flexible, and you know don't uh, default to what they're used to presenting out to the world. The
Hmm.
TED audience is so vast and diverse, and it's so global. Play with that.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
find it fascinating. So I guess from that
Yeah.
experience, like from your viewpoint, how is your experience with that?
I, you know, sometimes I go into things without really quite understanding the extent of them, which I'm actually really glad about, because had I known the amount of work that went into organizing a TEDx event, I don't know if I would have done it.
Same here.
Um,
Same here.
yeah, I think it stretched me in ways I had no idea would happen, and I feel like one of the biggest, you know, I, one of the hardest things as a TEDx organizer is curating your speakers. And for people interested in becoming TEDx speakers, TEDx organizers are looking at a lot of different layers in terms of who they want on their stage. They need diversity of thought, diversity of age, diversity of identity, race, like any kind of diversity you can imagine, that they're thinking about it. And you want different ages. You don't want to, as the term I remember hearing was, you don't want to curate from the couch. You don't want to
Yeah.
just curate an easy show. And it's very difficult because, you have so many people applying for events. And it's not that the ideas aren't good. It's that, you know what, I already have someone speaking, from a sort of a business lens. I can't have another talk like that, even though I want to. So, there are a lot of different ways that organizers can work with that. I remember seeing an event it was Cape May, TEDx Cape May, and they had like 5-minute talks from the local community, which I thought was a really brilliant way to
Yeah.
bring people in. So there are a lot of different things you can do. And I kind of forgot your question, so I'm gonna extend this a little bit, but I really feel that curating the TEDx event and being in that position um, really has given me an understanding of sort of when I submit to agents and editors, not just me, but everyone. And when an agent says this story isn't right for me, yeah, and you get a rejection, um, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like your story. It might mean that they already acquired a story similar to the themes in your story or your subject, or so many times you know ideas of in the universe, and 5 different people are writing stories about, like right now I'm seeing a lot of story picture books being published about wombats. I'd never heard of a wombat. Right now
Yeah.
I've seen at least 2 or 3 about that. So I don't know, lives or something. And
Yeah.
so I feel like you have to understand that you have to have like kind of a thick skin and realize like it might not be about your writing, it might not be about your idea, it just might not be a good fit for them at this point. So you have
Yeah,
to keep
exactly.
trying. Yeah,
Exactly. And in the end, it's a business decision, right? And if they feel like
exactly.
there's not and that is a field and an industry that it has gone through massive transformation.
Yes.
I am happy that the children's books are something that people are trying to push their kids to, especially during a time where we're relying on electronics.
Mhm.
I have a 3-year-old for the audience that doesn't know, and I'm not going to sit here and say like I am this total authority on great parenting. I sometimes go the easy way out and I give my kid a tab the iPad just to go through things, but we do try to if she's not completely past her bedtime, for us to sit every night and read like 2 or 3 books with her, so she grows up with this love and affection towards literature and books, because I also
Mhm.
think that that's a basis, creating like a solid foundation for better effective communication
Mhm.
and being a
Mhm.
better effective communicator. And as we're seeing now, right, with this crazy experiment of how technology has fully ingrained into our lives, people are losing that. And they're
Mhm.
losing it at an alarming rate. And that's impacting so many different generations in
Mhm.
different ways. So, if you want your kids to grow up loving books, you have to actually sit with them and to go through the process of reading those books.
And also have books around, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, have them around that they can take out themselves and look at, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's so, I mean, I'm like 100% pro literacy, but I think that, right now I'm a volunteer reading buddy and with like first and second graders. And one of the kids that I work with, she's a little bit of a reluctant reader. She's in second grade, and I bring, picture. And she's rereading now some of the picture books that I bring. And, she's becoming, even though she's memorized some of it, she's becoming more fluent and she's recognizing the words. And I'm not saying my once a week reading time with her is, changing everything, but, I have noticed from when I started to now, she's definitely becoming more fluent in the books that we're looking at, and she's looking at the words in a different way. And just like my student separates I bring like 9 or 10 picture books, and she spreads them out on the table and separates them into a yes pile, a no pile, a maybe pile. And and we reread books and pick them in, pick out the books she told me she wants from the library, and it's really fun and it's joyful, right? This is not a reading lesson. I'm not teaching her. I'm enjoying books with her.
Yeah.
And I think for young children, um, that repetition of reading those books over and over again, and they say, oh, I'm reading this, and even though they've memorized it, it's still important. They're learning the literacy of reading, of turning pages, of title pages and sight words, and that's so important to build that foundation. And
Absolutely.
actually, just having books around does that, you
Yeah,
know
absolutely. And my I hate saying this because my mom listens to this show, so she's gonna be like, "Oh, you went on this show and you complained about me." But yeah, she didn't really like sit with us and read, and at least with me, from what I recall. But in the later years, right? But
Mm,
I feel like you have to invest that time, and
mm,
again, as a new parent, we're both really trying to do that and show her, so she's focused on that piece, just because literacy levels in the US are just so bad.
mm,
And a lot of parents think, all right, well, I'll just work as hard as I can to get myself in the best school district as I can, right? That's everybody's
Mm-hmm.
ambition as a parent,
Right.
like get in the best school district that I can afford, right? And this is
Mm-hmm.
an American thing, right? Another for people that are outside of America, they're not going to know what we're talking about,
Okay.
but you if you don't invest that time to show kids that you can grow so much through reading books, they're just never going to really fall in love with it. And there's so
Right.
many untold amazing stories that you can learn
Mm-hmm.
from.
I think it's also really important, and there are, a lot of scientific studies about how reading fictional stories builds empathy. And I think that is just something that everyone could use to and work on, is building their empathy skills. And I'm going to give a book recommendation right now for adults and children. It's a picture book called The Rabbit Listened by Corey Doerfeld, and I have recommended it to a number of therapists, actually adult therapists for adults, and they've been blown away by it. And it is one of the best examples of how to build empathy, of how to be empathetic. So,
Wow. Wow.
that it's not just reading, and it's not just loving reading, which is of course incredibly important. It's, our emotional health, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a writer, I imagine whether you're writing for children or young adults or adults, irrespective of genre, there's always a balance that you need to strike between entertainment and potentially education, right? So, I guess how do you work on that balance?
Well, um, for the my book that just recently got published, um, I try to approach. I really love science, and so any story that I'm writing, I try to add science in if I can. And in this book in particular, there are two actual experiments in the story. So um, it's not didactic, like it's not a you have to do this kind of a thing. It's two siblings interacting with each other. But I looked at the standard, like the science standards for grades K through 3, and I tried to align the experiments with the standard, so a classroom teacher could use it. The main character uses the scientific method, so I try to bring in that kind of real life stuff, even though it's a fictional story. And
Yeah,
that that's how I try to balance
trial
it.
and error. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, with that, right? Obviously, we introduced you as a children's book writer, and we're talking about some concepts from your book. So, what's the title of the book, and what's the story essentially?
It's called Frankenstein's Matzah, a Passover parody, and it's about a little kid who brings a matzah to life during Passover, and the zaniness that ensues from that.
Oh wow! so,
Yeah,
so I imagine it's a funny book, not a scary book.
it's a funny book. No, I didn't want to get into. So it's a mashup between the Frankenstein story and the Passover story. Passover is a Jewish holiday, and basically there was like a mean pharaoh who wanted to, who enslaved the Jewish people, and terrible, horrible things happened. But I didn't want to focus on that.
Yeah,
So,
obviously.
and of course, in Frankenstein, some terrible things happen. But it was actually a really good meld of two stories, because um, when the main character V fails 1,817 times before they finally succeed at bringing this matzah to life. And what happens is basically, the V didn't really think about the implications of what it means to bring something to life. And so with the Pharaoh story during Passover, the Pharaoh enslaved people, and V's thinking like, I don't want to enslave this little matzah, and really goes through this whole questioning, and finally says, you're a free matzah, you can go. I don't own you, you know, which is like kind of deep for a picture book, but it works because, you know, it's a funny picture book. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I imagine zaniness ensues.
yeah, it's fun. And I just got this really like thoughtful review of my book, and the person said like these are really important questions, you know, these ethical questions about like just because you can do something, should you? You
Yeah,
know, and that's true. And you know, just to like tangent a little, I just heard about this sci science situation where they can now keep a pig's brain alive on its own without its body fully functioning. And they can do experiments without the rest of the body organs interfering. So they can really only just focus on the brain. And I was thinking, like, if the brain is fully functional, like, does that mean it's conscious?
yeah.
That's
Well,
horrifying to
well,
me,
yeah, there's a lot of ethical
right?
questions there.
Yeah.
So
So,
I guess, so you, in your background, right? Like you've been a teacher, you've done a variety of different things, a lot of volunteering. I guess, how is the process from, okay, deciding I want to do a children's book to the actual completion, right? Was it a next day process? Was it a very seamless process? Or did this require multiple years? Because I feel like many of us out there are thinking about, oh, I would like to do this. I would like to do something very creative. And it was always my dream to do this. But we always
mhm.
struggle with pushing the needle to actual action. So, what allowed you to do this?
So I was a teacher. I was a kindergarten, first grade teacher. And during that time, there, you know, of course, weren't as many books as there are now, and weren't as many like diverse books and that kind of stuff to bring into the curriculum. And so wherever there was a hole, I would fill it by writing something. So I was, and from a child, I was always writing. I was always writing stories, and I never really thought about being a writer until my daughter was 7. So this was like 15 years ago. And there weren't a lot of like youngish middle grade books with Jewish characters in them. And I thought, I'm going to write one. So I did. And I actually wrote a middle grade novel. I didn't have any idea what I was. And I would, you know, I was getting up early because my kids were younger. And, you know, if I wrote 3 words one day and that's all I could write, that was fine. You know, I was just like writing the story. And when I finished it, I didn't really quite know what to do. And, you know, it's really interesting because I was a reader my whole life. And I thought, oh, I can write. You know, I've been reading books my whole life, but I wasn't reading like a writer. So I didn't, until I really delved into learning about the craft of writing, I wasn't really aware of the structure and, you know, all of those different elements. And so after I wrote that, I thought, I am the greatest writer in the world. Everyone should publish my story. And, you know, I submitted a couple places like people do, happen because it clearly was not ready.
Yeah.
So I think it took about 2 years before I really started taking classes and learning about the craft of writing. And I found out about an organization that I volunteer for called the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. It's shortened to SCBWI.org. And it's a wonderful organization, especially for people who are just starting out. They're a global organization with regions all over. And I started taking classes and I started reading books and I started meeting other people in the Kidlit community and
Wow.
working on my craft. And so really it took, you know, basically like 15 years with time off because there were times that I did take time off from writing because of stuff going on in my life and TEDx
Yeah,
took up a
obviously.
lot of time. Uh, And so yeah, I started working on it, and in 2018, I came up with this idea for this book that got published, and started working on it and writing it, and it went through a lot of iterations, and then finally I submitted it and was lucky enough to get accepted and published.
Excellent. And is that 2, 3 years in addition to the 15, or is that the three
No,
years?
that's included in it. I submitted it in 2019 or 2020, I can't remember. And so it took all that time to get published.
Okay, perfect. So if there's someone out there that is really passionate about doing something and has been thinking about it a very long time, you know, Kimberly here was working on this for 15 years. So if you're not inspired by that, if you're not motivated by that, then ask yourself, do you really want it? How much do you want it, right? But now that you've done it, right? How easier is it going? So I guess, there's two pieces, right? You went from 0 to 1, and that needed 15 years. How much easier is 1 to 2 going to be from this moment onwards?
That's a really interesting question because I only have control over what I do,
Yeah.
right? So I have control over finishing my, manuscripts. I have control over making sure they're absolutely polished, and I have control over sending them out. Once they get sent out, I have no control.
Yeah.
So, um, that, like you said, the publishing industry has gone through massive changes, and yeah, so I mean, I can only keep going and moving forward. And now, as opposed to when I first started out, self-publishing is so accepted now that it is, something I sometimes think about, especially with one of my stories, which is like the story of my heart, and I haven't gotten any traction on. So, that's something that you can do now. I do suggest, if self-publishing is the route that people take, that they really, um, spend the money on an outside editor, because I have seen a lot of self-published books that weren't as highly
Polished as they should be.
edited, yeah, as traditionally published. So if you're going to spend money, spend it on that.
Yeah, and that's fair,
Yeah.
because maybe sometimes also people are so focused on getting it done that
Mm-hmm.
they don't really think about that detail. Like, get somebody else that does this for a living to really
Yeah.
help you, and that will only just elevate what you're trying to give out to the world. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess, what was the writing process like? You decided on the idea in 2018, right?
Mm-hmm.
From that point onwards, how long did it take you to write the book? Were you going back and forward? And obviously, with children's book, there's a lot of illustration. So you're not only coordinating with your editor, you're coordinating with the illustrator. There's different creative pieces involving this, and you're trying to bring not just your vision to life, but a amalgamated version of that vision out to the world. So how do you work with different people? What's that process like in an effective
So
way?
yeah, so I wrote my first draft in 2018. Actually, I can tell you it was May of 2018. And I wrote it out. I remember writing it very quickly and thinking, "Oh, wow,
It's
this is
done.
kind of
This
cool."
was easy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. And I think I wrote, I worked on it a little bit, and then I put it away for about 8 months. And the initial idea was there, with a little kid bringing a matzah to life. And then I listened, but it was not direct. It was not Frankenstein. The character's last name was like Matzah Stein or something like that. I listened to a podcast from the New York Public Library about how Frankenstein was so embedded in our culture. And I thought, I want to be a part of that. So I changed, I went directly for, I changed the character's last name to Frankenstein. I called it Frankenstein's Matzah. And I started, being like super direct that it was like this kid was a descendant of Victor Frankenstein. So then as I was writing it, it's like really dialogue heavy. And I really love comics and I love graphic novels. So I thought maybe I could, kind of make it into like a book. And I researched how to do that. And so you have to write it out in a script form, actually, with like scene descriptions and panel descriptions. And so I wrote it out and I worked on it. And I have a critique group of other writers and we share our work and they give feedback and I give feedback and I got it to what I thought it was as polished as possible. And so I wrote it out in a script format, but if you're not experienced reading graphic novels and comics, I felt like it might be hard to read. So I had remembered another children's author had written a blog post. Her name's Tara Lazar, and she wrote a blog post about writing in a grid format, actually in boxes. And I found that post and I looked at it and I wrote the story out that way as well. And I sent it both ways. And I explained I sent it directly, a direct submission to a publisher. And I explained what I did and why I did it and how it might be easier to read that way. And actually, when she offered, to buy it, she thanked me for doing that because she thought, it was easier
It's
to
a
read.
creative way. Also, it
Yeah.
was probably different than all the other submissions that she got out there. So that's actually
Yeah.
really smart.
So how the submission worked was it's a small Jewish press in Seattle. It's called Intergalactic Afikomen. And on Twitter, or what used to be Twitter, there are different like things called like hashtag PB pitch. So it's hashtag picture book pitch. And it's like a day where you can pitch your picture book. And so I pitched it and she actually liked it, which made it a lot easier to send my submission in because then I could say, you liked my pitch. And it kind of put me on the top of the pile as opposed to
Yeah.
the bottom. Yeah, and it was like a really good fit for their mission and it worked out. And so she offered to buy it, so which was really
Yeah.
exciting.
So now that you're officially a published author, I guess what has kind of changed from a mindset perspective for you?
Well, I feel like I'm a part of like I was, kind of looking in and now I'm in. So that
Yeah.
feels really good. And I think the biggest thing for me, having historically had a little bit of self-confidence issues is and also like finishing issues. I would have like a lot of ideas and not finish them, that I can do something to completion. I've done it, and I can do it again. I know I can. And if those little voices come up, I can say, yeah, I hear you, but I'm gonna like, you go over there. I'm gonna just work hard and get it done now. But I do want to just go back to one thing you said. Usually in, traditionally published books, the author and illustrator don't work together. The publisher finds the illustrator. Didn't have any contact with the illustrator, but because my story was comic style, I did have like panel descriptions and scene descriptions that I kept as general as possible because I didn't want to, kind of color the illustrator's, view. So that was as much input as I had.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. So I guess with that, right, I just stepping back and just listening to your journey to where you are right now, you had multiple times in your life you identified as something, right? Whether it was a teacher, a wife, a parent, a TEDx organizer, a volunteer, and now a children's book author. How do you pivot through all those throughout your life? And for people that might be stuck on one of those, right, and they want to identify as something else, what advice do you have for those people?
That's a really good question.
That's why we're here. That's why we're
Yeah,
here.
in
Gotta
the
have good
beginning,
questions.
right. In the beginning, I actually was a photographer. I was a
Yeah.
professional photographer. And it's funny because
What
I
what
always
years
knew
was this for context for the audience?
I graduated from photography school in 1987.
Excellent.
So after that, and then I got my master's in education. I want to say in 97, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
So I have to say that was my being a photographer and being like an artist and that kind of stuff. That was my first major identity.
Yeah.
And that was really hard to give up. I always knew at some point I wanted to be a teacher because, but when I was younger, I always worked in like daycare and I babysat and that kind of stuff. And I knew I liked that, but I also knew I wasn't, I want to say at that time, like kind of old enough to do that. I
Yeah.
just wasn't ready to do it. And so when I went back to get my master's, which I have to say was super fun because I was like in my 30s and it was like really
Everybody's
fun to
like,
be
yeah,
back in
yeah,
school. I
yeah,
loved it. But not, it was just really hard not saying like, oh, I'm a photographer and like
yeah.
I'm really
Because that's
cool
who
and all
your
that.
identity is. Like that's how you
Yeah,
introduce yourself. That's what you go by. And maybe
right.
now you've um
And it's
are so
cool.
far. Yeah, it's cool. Well, that's the thing, right? It's the cool factor, right? I remember when I
Right,
would introduce myself as, I'm a TEDx organizer,
right,
and
yeah,
people would
yeah.
be like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, what does that entail? Can I
Right,
talk? I'm like, yeah, sure. But
yeah.
um, it really does create a level of intrigue and mystery.
Hmm.
And we go through life trying to in having all these interactions with people. Everybody wants to be interesting,
Hmm.
and maybe we all are, but we don't have that one thing that we could say that can kind of open that conversation to show that. And
Hmm.
sometimes when you're doing something really cool, that's immediately the door for it, right? And you could
Mm.
start engaging people right away.
For
Yes,
those of you
absolutely.
who want to do something, but you're a little scared to try it or to go out, I mean, and think like this can be wrapped up in am I good enough or will I be able to do this? You know, and I would love to help support you in your journey because you have value and what you want to do is important and maybe it'll help change the world.
Exactly. Exactly. So, Kimberly, if people want to find you or your book, which is Frankenstein's Matzah, I got it over here, guys. Where can we find the book and where can we find you?
You can find the book at all major retailers. I do want to promote, buy it from your independent bookstore, but I totally understand if you
Yay.
can't. Um, and you can find me at K.Marcus Writes, WRITES.com. And yeah, I'm on all the
Excellent.
socials at K.Marcus Writes, and I would love to hear from you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody, for joining us on this episodes of the Thought Fuel podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.